Hey there YouTube, it's that one guy in lit class. So, you've got an assignment due, an essay to be precise, and it's probably set by some mean English teacher like I used to be, and you have no idea where to start. Well, fear not, intrepid person, you've come to the right place. In this series of videos, I'm going to walk you through the parts of an argumentative essay and give you some tips and tricks to make sure that your next essay is your best one yet. So let's get started. This video is going to focus on the thesis statement of your essay, and we'll be focusing on argumentative essays in particular, which just means that you're trying to prove something. The thesis statement is the most important part of an essay. It's what holds the whole thing together, so let's talk about what a thesis statement is even, and how to go about making a good one. To put it simply, a thesis statement sets out what you're going to be arguing for the rest of the essay. It usually comes at the end of your introduction, and for most papers you write should be no more than a sentence or two. As a teacher, I should be able to read your thesis statement and know exactly what you'll be trying to prove to me for the rest of the paper, which brings us to some do's and don'ts for a good thesis statement. First off, your thesis statement should be specific. There should be no vague words like might or maybe. If you have specific examples you want to use later on in the paper, introduce them here. If you're writing about a book or a character, introduce their names in the thesis, even though your teacher has read the book and should know what you're talking about. Second, your thesis should be confident. Avoid using words like I think or in my opinion. If I'm your teacher, I know that the thesis is what you think. That's the whole point of having you write this paper in the first place. Even if you don't fully believe your own argument, you shouldn't show that in the thesis. If you want to include counter-arguments, that's fine, but do it later in one of the body paragraphs. Finally, your thesis should contain a statement that can be argued by reasonable people. Usually this means that there is some statement, or sometimes it's called a claim, and then a reason or reasons that support that statement. Alright, so now that we have all these do's and don'ts, let's go through some examples of good thesis statements and ones that maybe aren't so good. And let's start with the specificity. Check out these two thesis statements. Which one is more specific? It's the first one, right? It contains the main character's name and gives clear reasons to support the argument that Odysseus is a hero, the reasons being his loyalty and bravery. As a teacher, I look at that second one and can't help but wonder if you read anything from the book because you don't even seem to know the main character's name of the very book that you're going to be talking about. Take a look at the first thesis statement again. Beyond just using a character name, do you see how the thesis has both a statement that will be the argument of the paper, which is Odysseus is a hero, and it has support for that argument because he's a hero through his loyalty and bravery? A good thesis has both of those things. You could go even further with the thesis by listing some specific instances of bravery or loyalty or whatever you want to focus on. Just be careful not to go overboard with it. Moving on from specificity, let's talk about confidence. Take a look at these two statements and tell me which one inspires more confidence. I'll give you a few seconds to read them through. You probably picked the second one, right? They both have the same information in them, worded slightly differently, but the second one is much more confident, none of the I think and maybe that the first one has. It shows me as a teacher that this writer is confident enough in their argument that they don't need to be unsure about it. As I said before, you can totally include counter-arguments if you want, just not in your thesis. We'll talk about how to do that in the video on body paragraphs. Okay, finally, let's talk about this last point. Your thesis should be able to be argued by reasonable people. What this means is that you shouldn't make your thesis so generic that no one can argue against it. I know sometimes it's tempting to pick something that's so obvious that you know you'll have your reader on your side, but that's not really the point of writing an essay. An essay should show that you understand the text, not that you can argue something obvious. Take a look at these examples and tell me which one is a better thesis. Okay, even though thesis 1 is true, it's so generic it's boring. And trust me, when you're a teacher and you have 30 essays to grade on the same thing, the last thing you want is to read a bunch of boring papers with generic arguments. The second thesis here lays out a specific argument that reasonable people could disagree with. If I really wanted, I could argue against your point, but you as a writer are hopefully going to show me that you're right by the examples you use in the body paragraphs of the paper. No one can really argue against that first thesis, but that doesn't mean it's better. It just means the arguments for it are so obvious that no one needs to point them out. Okay, finally, I had a lot of students still really be unsure about thesis statements even after all this. So I wanted to end the video by giving a basic formula, if you will, for how to write a thesis statement. If it's helpful, great, but if you already know how you want to write yours, you can skip past this to the end. This is often known as the tripartite or three-pronged thesis. This was the first kind I was taught, and some places still use it. It's mainly designed for standard 5-paragraph essays with an intro, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Before you even write your thesis, you come up with 3 examples to support your argument first, and list them at the end of the thesis. It looks like this. Notice how there's a statement to start with, everything before as shown by, and then 3 examples to support that statement, which is everything after as shown by. In an essay, those 3 examples then become the topics of your 3 body paragraphs. This is a super basic essay structure, but it can be modified to have more or fewer reasons after the statement if you still need a shorter or longer essay, and it can help keep you organized. However, most teachers will want you to steer away from it once you gain a bit of confidence because it's very formulaic and repetitive. As a teacher, I was okay with my students using something like this for an essay or 2, but then encouraged them to try something different so they had experience with different kinds of organization. We'll talk a bit more about that in the section on body paragraphs too. You may want to check with your teacher to see what they think of your thesis before you write the rest of your essay, just to make sure that you're doing things the way that they want. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful in your journey to write a really good thesis, and as always, please leave comments or questions down below, and I'll see you soon for part 2. Cheers!